Hi friends, today's video is for beginners and I think it's going to be super relevant. This video is for those who have never picked up watercolor or maybe tried it once in school but haven't touched it since. Now you're eager to start and you might be wondering, what do I need to start painting with watercolors? You've probably already opened your favorite online store and seen a bunch of confusing things. Brushes, paper, paints, and you have no idea what to choose. Today we'll go over the basic set for beginners. In this video I'll talk specifically about what beginners need. We'll dive deeper into materials in other videos. I will have a separate video about comparing paper textures, how to read watercolor packaging, pigments for beginners and much more. I understand this information can be overwhelming, but to start, you don't need to know everything right away. Later, as you try things out and begin to get the hang of it, you'll learn more. In the background, I'll be painting my favourite figs. If you like this painting, I'll record a separate tutorial with comments on it. Let me know in the comments if you'd like that, and if there's enough interest, I'll make that tutorial. Let's start with the watercolours you can use as a beginner. If you're still not familiar with colours and the terms like warm and cool shades mean nothing to you, I recommend starting with a basic set. These sets usually have the essential colours. Focus on the brands that are available in your region. Once you get used to specific colours and mixes, it'll be easier to restock if you run out. It's better to buy watercolours in professional art stores, not in stationery stores that sell children's paints, which are usually of lower quality. The difference between professional and children's watercolours is the pigment concentration. Yes, professional watercolours are a bit more expensive, but I assure you you'll get much more enjoyment and be more satisfied with the results. Additionally, the colours mix more purely. If you're serious about watercolour, I recommend choosing high-quality professional or even amateur-grade paints. I won't go into the differences between amateur and professional grades now, but all the paints I'm talking about fall into the professional range. If you're in Russia or the post-Soviet countries, where Neva Palette, Nevskaya Palitra, watercolours are widely available, I recommend them. They are more affordable, and a comparable brand from the Netherlands, Van Gogh, is slightly more expensive, probably because it's imported. Van Gogh is considered amateur watercolour, and it has a big brother, Rembrandt, which is less common but is professional grade. You can choose a standard box of Neva Palette's Sonnet watercolours, and that'll be enough to start. Later you can dive deeper into colours and understand warm and cool tones. If you've decided to assemble your set piece by piece, or your store only sells watercolours individually, I recommend getting the following set. In stores where watercolours are sold individually, there's usually a catalogue. If there isn't, just go by eye and read the names on the packaging. The primary colours are yellow, blue and red. In theory, you can create any colour from these. In my video tutorials, I talk a lot about this. Subscribe to the channel to see more of my watercolour lessons. It's best to get 2 of each of these primary colours, different shades. Now, I'll come back to say that yes, we need both warmer and cooler shades, and I'll name the specific colours. For yellow shades, the cool shade is lemon yellow, and the warm shade is, for example, cadmium yellow, or just yellow. One colour is warmer, the other is cooler. Next, the reds. For red shades, you can choose cadmium red. In general, all cadmium colours are warm, so if you see the name cadmium, it's a warm shade. I also recommend getting cadmium orange. It's a very useful colour. Then, pick a cool red, which could be permanent red, alizarin crimson or carmine. Choose one of these. For blues, I recommend ultramarine, which is a warmer shade, and a cooler shade like cerulean or phthalo blue. I specifically recommend phthalo blue because it has different properties compared to ultramarine, but you can get all three colours. Ultramarine, cerulean, which is great for painting skies if you're into landscapes, and phthalo blue, which is transparent, vibrant, and very useful for bright mixes. As for intermediate shades, those you get by mixing yellow and red, for example, to make orange, I recommend having cadmium orange because it's versatile and I personally use it a lot in mixes. When it comes to greens and purples, I personally don't use any specific colours. I mix all my colours myself. It's more convenient for me, and I like the shades I get from mixing. But if you find it difficult to imagine how this all works, you can choose a purple and a green shade. Here, I won't recommend specific ones, just pick what you like. Next, consider getting some earth tones, which are more complex colours. I recommend ochre. It comes in various types like golden ochre, yellow ochre, or just ochre. I personally prefer golden ochre. I also recommend pain grey, which is another widely used colour, and you might want to pick a black like oxide black, which is a granulating colour, though that's a topic for deeper discussion. All other colours can generally be created by mixing, so I won't recommend any more. For beginners, it's important to master the ability to mix colours and create the shades you need. Watercolour paints and pigments have different properties like transparency, light fastness, and vibrancy. Under almost every video on my channel, I list the colours I use in that lesson. Now, let's talk about paper. This is another topic with a lot of nuances, but let's cover the basics. Watercolour paper needs to be thick. The thickness is measured in grams per square metre, and it's usually indicated on the packaging. If it's not, don't buy that paper. A reputable manufacturer will always list the parameters I'm about to discuss on the packaging. For watercolour, the minimum thickness starts at 200 mm. If you see watercolour paper labelled with 180 or, heaven forbid, 160, especially in some cheap Chinese sketchbooks or from popular stores, be cautious. You can buy it, I can't stop you. But remember that it will warp a lot, and it's only suitable for very dry work where you use minimal water, very little water. The more water you use, the thicker the paper needs to be to absorb that water without turning into a blotter. I believe that anything above 300 GSM is more of a luxury or necessary only for very large formats where you're pouring water in rivers, and you need thicker paper just to keep it intact and in good condition. You can also find watercolour canvases or specific primers for watercolour, but these are more specialised tools and not something a beginner should worry about. We'll focus only on paper. The next important parameter of watercolour paper, which should also be indicated on the packaging, is the material. If the material is not specified, it's likely cellulose paper. Usually, even on cellulose watercolour paper, it's stated that it's made of cellulose. Cellulose is the classic paper used for almost everything, but there's also watercolour paper made from cotton. This paper might say 100% cotton, or indicate a percentage like 50% or 30% cotton, meaning it's a mix of cotton and cellulose. Cotton paper often intimidates beginners because of its price. Yes, this paper is significantly more expensive than cellulose. I myself resisted buying good quality paper for a long time, But if you have the financial means and can choose, go for cotton paper. I recommend cellulose paper only if you're really afraid of ruining a sheet, and this fear is holding you back from starting to paint. If you choose cheaper paper, it might make you feel less anxious, so in that case, go for the cheaper option. But still, pay attention to the parameters like thickness. Make sure it's at least 200 GSM. Personally, I mostly use cotton paper from Bao Hong. I used to love Saunders Waterford paper, but unfortunately, it's very expensive to ship to Armenia now. So, for now, I've settled on Bao Hong because it's relatively easy to get in online stores, for example through AliExpress. Again, I recommend choosing a brand that's easily accessible in your region. If ordering from AliExpress works for you, I think it's a good option. If there aren't any local online stores in your region, try looking at what's available in your local art stores. There are also shops that ship directly from Europe, and I know people who order from there, especially if you live closer to European regions or in Europe itself. In terms of format, watercolor paper is sold as individual sheets, and if you're buying in a physical store, you can try buying a few sheets from different brands to see which one you like best. This is a good option, and I recommend not ignoring it if you have quality art stores nearby. If you can only buy paper in a pad or need to order several sheets at once, it's usually cheaper to buy loose sheets without any packaging. Of course, the manufacturer adds extra cost for any packaging. Another format that often surprises beginners is the glued block, specifically for watercolor. It looks like a drawing pad, but it's glued on all four sides. Don't be alarmed, this is normal and convenient. It prevents your sheet from warping, so you don't need to secure it separately. You just take such a block, paint, and then carefully cut the sheet out with a paper knife or something similar like a plastic knife. This way, you can separate the sheet and continue painting. Hardcover sketchbooks tend to be more expensive, so choose according to your budget. Sketchbooks are convenient to take with you and pleasant to flip through later. But if you want to create artwork that you can frame, it's better to buy loose sheets rather than albums. This will be more economical, and you won't have to cut anything out afterward. Additionally, large individual sheets can be cut to a size that suits you. Another important aspect of watercolor paper is the texture. On cheaper cellulose paper, the texture might not be indicated or might be described as something strange like eggshell or linen. Don't confuse linen as a material. Here it's referring to the texture of the paper, and not all manufacturers offer it. The internationally recognized textures are fine, torsion and satin. Satin is the smoothest paper with almost no texture. Torsion has the most pronounced porous texture, while fine has a medium texture. It's probably best to start with fine, as it has a balanced texture, but you can try different options depending on what you like and what techniques you prefer. If you enjoy detailed work, like botanical illustrations, or anything that involves intricate line work, satin might be a good choice, as it allows for precise, fine brushstrokes. Torsion, with its textured surface, works well for techniques like dry brushing, where the texture can create interesting effects, but not everyone likes it. You'll likely need to experiment with several types of paper to find what you prefer. Next, let's talk about brushes. There are many different brushes, and I use quite a few in my work. For each piece, I list the specific brushes I use. But for beginners, the first brush you should get is a round synthetic or Kolinsky sable brush in a teardrop shape with a fine point. Having a fine point is essential. This is a very versatile brush that will help in many situations, and it should last you quite a while. Afterward, I highly recommend getting a larger brush. As you move to larger sizes, it becomes easier to work with a flat brush rather than a round one. Flat brushes can be softer, made from squirrel hair, or stiffer, made from synthetic fibres. Regarding brush materials, the softer the brush, for example, squirrel hair is very soft, the more water it can hold, resulting in wetter washes. Stiffer brushes, like synthetic ones, provide more control over your brush strokes, but hold less water, making it harder to do large washes. Watercolor generally favours soft brushes, so you don't need anything stiffer than synthetic. Bristle or pony hair brushes aren't necessary here. However, for large formats, you can use brushes like Cosley brushes or flat wash brushes, but that goes beyond the topic of brushes for beginners. Additionally, I recommend beginners get a liner brush for fine lines. This brush has long, thin bristles, perfect for creating delicate details. For fine detailing, you can use a thin, short brush. It works well, but it holds less water, so it's harder to create even lines, like those needed for wires or branches. For watercolor, calligraphy brushes are fantastic. They come in many different sizes, so you can choose one based on the scale of your work. These brushes hold a lot of water and are great for controlled, precise lines. Their design, made for calligraphy, makes them perfect for creating clean, defined strokes. I often talk about different brushes in my tutorials, and in this lesson I'm using a calligraphy brush throughout. I won't be mentioning specific brands here. There are many calligraphy brushes on AliExpress, but the quality can be inconsistent, so it's important to carefully check the size of the brush and not be tempted by the lowest prices. However, you can find decent calligraphy brushes in sets on AliExpress, and I have one that's been serving me for a very long time. Now, let's talk about additional materials. You'll definitely need a jar for water. I recommend getting a large one right away, so you don't have to constantly run to change the water, and it stays clean for longer. As for the palette where we mix colours, you can see that I have a ready-made palette on my right. But initially, you don't need to buy one. You can use a regular white ceramic plate if you have one at home. Some people also use white ceramic tiles. You can also buy a palette with a flat surface like mine. It's important to note that palettes made for oil or gouache paints won't work here. We need a flat, spacious surface where we can easily mix the colours we need. By the way, many watercolour sets have trays in the lid of the box, and you can use those for mixing as well. Next, you'll need paper towels. Some people use toilet paper while others prefer cloth rags. Personally, I like paper towels the most because they absorb water longer than toilet paper and are better than regular napkins. Plus, you don't have to deal with washing anything afterward. Cloth rags are also less absorbent compared to the thicker texture of paper towels, which last longer and are more convenient. For pencils, I recommend using a medium soft pencil. A very soft pencil might leave too many marks on the paper, while a very hard one can scratch the surface. So, a medium hard pencil is best. You'll also need an eraser. I suggest either a soft eraser or a kneaded eraser, which is soft and pliable, and it lifts the marks from the paper without damaging it. This kind of eraser doesn't leave extra smudges. In general, be careful when working with watercolour paper because it's quite porous, and it can be easily scratched or damaged, which will show in your washes later. You'll also need some kind of drawing board or something to secure your paper on. It could be a wooden board or a ready-made drawing pad. I mainly use a plastic board because it doesn't absorb water, it's easy to clean, and it doesn't warp. Although I'll admit, I don't clean it as often as I should. Additionally, use masking tape, not regular tape, because regular tape can leave marks on the paper. If you don't use a lot of water in your work and prefer more detailed, dry brushwork, like in this piece where I didn't tape the paper at all because I'm working in a sketchbook and not doing large washes, you can also use binder clips to hold your paper in place. These are handy if you're painting outdoors, so the wind doesn't blow your paper around. There's a lot more we could talk about regarding materials for plein air painting or sketching sessions, as it's popular to call it these days. But that's probably best for a separate video. If you're interested in that, leave a comment. If I get enough comments, I'll definitely make a video on this topic. As I wrap up this video, I want to remind you that in the tutorials I post on Patreon, or the ones available here, I usually list the materials I use in the description. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'll make sure to answer and focus more on those details next time. Remember, everyone starts as a beginner. Trying something new is always scary but incredibly exciting. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos. Bye. C.